Hey everyone, it's Taehyung. I've never done this before, not like this. Usually I'm smiling, waving at the camera, keeping everything light and playful. But today, I want to talk about something real, something that's been weighing on me for months, something I haven't shared publicly because it's not easy to say out loud. I settled into the studio couch, bright lights casting a warm glow over everything. On the surface, it looked like another casual segment, a bridge between albums, a moment for fans to peek behind the curtain. But beneath that surface, I felt hollow, like a drum with no skin. The questions had been relentless. When will you get married? Who is she? What will the wedding look like? Fans, media, family, they'd all painted a picture of my life that wasn't mine to begin with. For a long time, I played along. I smiled, I said, we'll see, because it was easier than explaining the truth. I had canceled the wedding that existed only in my head, the one everyone else was building for me. I hadn't called a planner or made a statement. There was no public cancellation, just a decision in my chest that felt heavier than anything I've ever carried. It wasn't dramatic, not at first. It was quiet, persistent, like a small tap inside my chest that eventually became impossible to ignore. The night it crystallized, I was alone in the dorm after an exhausting rehearsal, sweat still clinging to my shirt, scrolling through messages I was too drained to answer, the TV muted in the background. A romantic drama unfolded on screen, a perfect, manufactured ending, and I felt an overwhelming exhaustion not of love but of performing it. Namjoon was at the kitchen table, quietly reading while somehow listening to the storm of thoughts I carried. You're thinking too loud, he said softly. I laughed weakly. I'm fine, I whispered, but it wasn't fine. My chest felt tight at the thought of promising a version of myself I couldn't keep. Namjoon didn't lecture or try to fix me. He simply said, then don't make a promise you can't live with. And I knew he was right. I cared deeply for someone in my life, someone kind, patient, someone who could make me laugh when I felt frantic. But in the quiet, the honest moments, I remembered the metronome inside me, the rhythm of my own life, the beat of my own art. I cannot pretend to step into a life that would silence that. I imagined the wedding, imagined the cameras, the smiles, the expectations. I imagined waking up the next morning knowing I had traded a part of myself I could never get back. And I realized something. Love cannot exist if you are forced to disappear. The realization was devastating but necessary. I told it to the empty room. I can't do this. Not like this. The words echoed in a way that wasn't sad. It felt honest, like breathing again after holding it in too long. I called my mother and told her. Her response was simple but terrifyingly insightful. If you ever get married, I want you to come home from the studio with that same light in your eyes, not less of it. I told my members, not as a press release, but just life unfolding in our dorm. Namjoon nodded. Jin gave a thumbs up. Yoongi simply said, write it. Hosok clapped. Jimin offered a quiet hug. Taehyung laughed to himself, realizing that honesty could be messy, unpolished, and still feel like family. I canceled the wedding in my head. I canceled the image of a version of myself that wasn't real. And yet, I didn't cancel love. I just rewrote it, slower this time, softer, realer. For the first time in a long time, I felt the quiet freedom of having nothing left to pretend about. I went out alone a few days later, hoodie up, mask on, headphones in, just walking. The Han River stretched before me, slow and steady. Its patient movement reminded me of what I wanted for my life. Steady, unapologetic, moving even when quiet. Taeyong sent me a message. You still awake? I sent a photo back, the river reflecting city lights, and realized that for once I was standing still long enough to truly breathe. Back in the studio, I returned to music not out of obligation, but because it was my heartbeat, my breath. I worked on a raw piece I'd recorded the night of my internal confession. No hooks, no commercial structure, just a melody heavy with sighs. Yoongi came in carrying coffee, observing in silence. Truth is usually flat. No reverb, no delay. It's the silence around it that's loud, he said. And he was right. I stripped the track back, removing every effect until the piano chords were naked, my hum almost breathy. It felt like failure at first, but Yoongi's words stayed with me. You're too honest for a small life. And I understood. Forgiveness of others does not make the music. I had to live my own rhythm. The days after that night by the Han River felt strange, like stepping off a moving walkway and realizing your legs need to find their own rhythm. I returned to the studio, the familiar hum of equipment and scattered instruments surrounding me, but everything felt different. The music didn't demand perfection or applause, it demanded honesty. And for the first time, I could give it freely. My members noticed it instantly. Namjoon, as always, was the first to speak. You okay to run through the set? He asked cautiously, sensing the shift in me. I nodded, not fully understanding it myself. We began practice. Each step, each beat, each note landing heavier than usual. It wasn't pressure, it was presence. I felt my body reacting to the music differently, with weight and intention, not obligation. The internal echo of the cancelled wedding still lingered though. Social media was ablaze with speculation, fan forums theorized endlessly. He's hiding a secret girlfriend, someone wrote. He's dedicating himself to art, another suggested. Headlines swung from bravery to fear to genius. But in the dorm, in the studio, life remained stubbornly ordinary. That ordinariness became a grounding force. I remember Jin, ever the orchestrator of comfort, making a huge bowl of ramen one evening. You know what the problem with being a perfectionist is? He said, sprinkling an almost suspicious amount of chili powder into the broth. I shook my head, steam rising between us. You try to make life perfect, he said, but life is messy. Ramen is messy. You can't fit ramen on a timeline. You just eat it when it's hot and stop when you're full. The lesson hit me like a note I'd been chasing for years. My personal life, love, art, everything didn't need to fit a perfect structure. It could be messy, hot, real. I ate, the spice burning my tongue, and felt the warmth settle in my chest in a way no fan comment, no media speculation, no imagined wedding could ever provide. This was the love I knew, the kind that didn't require a polished narrative, only presence. Back in the studio, I returned to the track I'd been shaping. Not yet. I had named it. No hooks, no refrains, just descending chords. Each note a confession, each pause a breath of relief. Yoongi watched silently for a while before placing 2 cups of coffee beside me. "You're making noise again," he said softly. I explained, leaning back, trying to find the exact truth between melody and memory. "Truth is usually flat," he continued. "No reverb, no delay. It's the silence around it that's loud." He was right. The echo I had feared of the wedding, of the expectations of the world still lingered. So I stripped everything back. Naked chords, breathy hums, no layers to hide behind. I felt like I was confessing not just to myself, but to anyone who had ever expected me to fit a mold I didn't belong in. There were missteps, of course. During rehearsal, Jose, our lead choreographer, pushed us relentlessly. A complex sequence, high energy, and I missed a beat just a fraction of a second, but it broke the symmetry. Hosok's usual sharp reprimand softened. He approached, hand on my shoulder. "Where are you trying to land in your head? Past? Future? Or here, in the now?" His words lingered. I realized I had been rushing to finish, trying to leapfrog discomfort, just as I had been rushing toward an imagined wedding. We started again. This time, I felt the floor beneath me, the air around me, the rhythm in my chest. I wasn't just executing steps. I was inhabiting them, centering myself. Jim leaned over with that mischievous grin of his. "For a guy who canceled his wedding, you look suspiciously like you just committed to something bigger." I smiled, letting the words land. "I committed to my own rhythm," I replied. Terrifying but freeing. In the quiet moments between runs, my thoughts returned to love. I cared deeply for someone who deserved someone whole, not a fragment of me borrowed by schedules and expectations. I realized that canceling the wedding wasn't about fear, it was about preparation, about integrity. The right love wouldn't ask me to vanish, wouldn't demand the dimming of the light that fueled my work, my life. Days passed, blending practice, meals, and quiet reflection. Each day, I felt a subtle shift. The pressure to conform to a pre-written story softened. The music took on a new weight, a new purpose. I wasn't chasing charts, applause, or validation. I was chasing breath, honesty, connection. The melodies I played, the rhythms I danced to, they weren't performances anymore. They were extensions of myself. One night, sitting by the piano alone, I returned to "Not Yet." My hands hovered over the keys, tracing the chords like a map of everything I had learned. The melody was sad but not hopeless, melancholy but not defeated. It carried the truth of choosing myself without abandoning love. The honesty in the music felt irreversible, yet it brought clarity, not chaos. The world outside continued its chatter, speculation rife with stories, assumptions, and rumors. But inside, in the studio, in our dorm, in the quiet hours of the night, life was ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Ordinary because it was simple: friends, food, practice. Extraordinary because it was real, because it was mine. And in that space, I realized that love, like music, could not be forced into a timeline or a perfect structure. It could only be lived in rhythm with truth, in harmony with oneself and others, in moments where breath and presence mattered more than expectation. Weeks passed, and I began to notice a shift, not a loud one, but a subtle change in how I moved through the world. The weight of expectation that had clung to me like a second skin was lighter. Not gone, but lighter. I could breathe without thinking about how it looked, without framing every moment for someone else. Even the studio felt different. The instruments didn't demand perfection, they demanded presence. I spent long hours alone at the piano, tracing the chords of Not Yet, letting them echo in the empty space. The piece had no hooks, no commercial appeal, just a raw confession, and every note carried a fragment of the truth I had been hiding. The more I played, the more I realized that honesty, like music, could be messy and imperfect, yet it resonated deeper than anything polished ever could. Yoongi stopped by one afternoon, quietly observing my work. He didn't comment at first, just placed a cup of coffee beside me and sat down. Finally, he said, "You're making noise again." I leaned back, trying to explain the melody of truth I was attempting to capture. He nodded slowly. Truth is flat, no reverb, no delay. It's the silence around it that's loud. I understood immediately. The lingering echoes weren't mistakes, they were the expectations, the imagined wedding, the world's voice that had haunted me for months. I stripped the track back, removing every effect, leaving only my voice and the piano, bare and fragile. It was terrifying at first to leave nothing between myself and the sound. But as I played, I felt the liberation of living inside my own rhythm. The realization hit me. Being too honest for a small life was not failure, it was courage. Practice with the members also reflected this newfound presence. We ran through intricate choreographies, and I found myself more attuned to every beat, every movement. When I stumbled, it wasn't panic that overtook me, it was awareness. Hoso caught me after a sequence, hand on my shoulder, asking, "Where are you trying to land in your head? Past, future, or here, now?" His words reminded me that life, like dance, required focus on the moment, on the pulse beneath my feet. We started over, and for the first time, I didn't rush. I felt the floor beneath me, the air around me, and the rhythm within me. Each step became deliberate, grounded, meaningful. Jim smiled, teasing, "For a guy who canceled his wedding, you look like you just committed to something bigger." I laughed and said, "I committed to my own rhythm." Even love began to make more sense. I realized that it wasn't about denying affection or avoiding commitment. It was about waiting until love fit without forcing me to compromise the parts of myself that were inseparable from my music, my art, my life. I could care deeply, but I could not vanish into someone else's picture of who I was supposed to be. The ordinary moments became extraordinary lessons. Jin, making ramen late at night, chaotic and messy, became a metaphor for life. Spicy broth, noodles tangled and imperfect, shared among friends, this was the love and life I wanted. Not staged, not curated, not performed, real, warm, imperfect, present. At night, I would walk alone, hoodie up, headphones in, listening to the city breathe. The Han River, slow and patient, became my mirror. Its movement reminded me that life doesn't rush to the next chapter. It flows steadily, unapologetically. Taehyung's message echoed in my mind. You finally stood still enough to watch the water move. Standing there, I realized that stillness was not waiting, it was foundation, presence, and clarity. I returned to the studio with a new perspective. Every melody, every note, every lyric was no longer an obligation to the charts or the world. It was an extension of myself. Even when mistakes happened, they were honest, human, and resonant. Music became less about performance and more about truth. The public would speculate, as always. Headlines, social media, rumors, they all painted a different story. But in my life, the ordinary moments carried more weight than any rumor ever could. Quiet dinners with the members, late night laughs, the sound of someone else breathing in the room, the rhythm of our shared life, it grounded me in reality. I realized that love could not exist in a vacuum of expectation. It had to be lived alongside art, alongside honesty, alongside the messy, real parts of life that no camera could capture. Canceling the wedding was not an act of fear, it was an act of self respect and preparation. I could only give someone my whole self if I first knew how to live with all of me. And so I began to embrace the messiness. The late night melodies, the missed beats, the chaos in the kitchen, the laughter with friends, the solitude by the river, it all became my rhythm. I learned that the loudest music sometimes comes from the quietest truths. I was still learning how to live without performing, without pretending, without a scripted expectation of who I was supposed to be. But in that learning, I found freedom, and in that freedom, I found harmony. Not balance, not symmetry, but the kind of harmony where everything moves differently yet fits together perfectly. In that space, I realized I hadn't canceled the dream of love. I had simply paused, rewriting it at my own pace, on my own terms. I could still love deeply, still give everything, but now it had to fit the rhythm of my life, not the imagined picture others had drawn for me. The quiet freedom of standing fully in my own life, fully in my music, fully in my presence became the foundation for everything that followed. And for the first time, I felt truly seen not by fans, not by media, not by expectation, but by myself. The world outside the studio continued to buzz, each headline and fan forum speculation like a distant echo I could no longer control. Rumors painted me as scared of love, reckless with emotion, or obsessed with my art at the expense of everything else. Some called it bravery, others avoidance. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. The only narrative that mattered was the one I carried in my chest, the one I lived in the quiet hours of the night, the one I built note by note, beat by beat. In the dorm, life carried on with its ordinary rituals, laughter, meals, rehearsal, coffee, chaos. Jin's late night ramen experiment had set the tone, messy, imperfect, alive. I realized that love, like music, could exist without perfection. It didn't demand fanfare or commentary, it demanded presence, it demanded honesty. And honesty, I discovered, sometimes meant walking away from an imagined future to protect the essence of yourself. I thought a lot about the person I cared for, the one who deserved someone fully present, fully engaged, not borrowed by schedules and expectations. I wanted to be someone who could show up completely, not as a fragment patched together from fleeting moments. Canceling the wedding didn't mean canceling love. It meant waiting for a love that could exist in harmony with everything I was, everything I loved, everything I created. Family became an anchor in those weeks. I called my mother, voice tight at first, explaining the decision I hadn't yet shared publicly. I think I'm finally okay, I said, relief softening the edges of my words. She listened, her response quiet but devastatingly clear. If you ever marry, I want you to come home with that same light in your eyes, not less of it." Her words hit me with a clarity I hadn't expected. Love should not diminish me. It should illuminate. The members noticed subtle changes too. Namjoon, always attuned to shifts in energy, gave quiet encouragement. Jin offered small gestures of support, balancing the role of superstar with the role of brother. Yoongi, as always, observed silently, speaking in precise, meaningful lines. Even Hosuk, relentless as ever in choreography, adapted, offering guidance not to correct, but to ground me. The studio became a laboratory for presence, a space where I could exist fully without expectation. I returned to Not Yet, refining it further. Each chord, each pause, each breath was stripped bare of embellishment. The melody became a reflection of my internal truth, a mixture of longing, acceptance, and patience. Yoongi's earlier words echoed, "Truth is flat, no reverb, no delay. It's the silence around it that's loud." And I had learned to hear that silence, to feel its weight, to let it shape the music without overwhelming it. Even my relationship with the person I cared for transformed. We spoke with honesty, with care, with space for growth and understanding. I explained my decision, the reason I couldn't step into a future that asked me to abandon my own rhythm. There were tears, mine and theirs, but also unexpected relief. We were no longer dancing to someone else's tempo. We were existing in a space where truth had precedence over expectation. Public statements became easier, not because the world would understand, but because I no longer needed validation. I spoke directly, simply. I canceled the wedding in my head. I canceled the expectation of a timeline and a perfect image. If marriage happens, it will happen when it fits with who I am, not who the world imagines me to be. It was met with curiosity, confusion, and admiration. But those reactions mattered little compared to the lightness I felt inside. Music, my true companion, absorbed the change. I could write melodies born from real emotion rather than obligation, dance with intent rather than rehearsal driven instinct. The studio became a sanctuary, a place where work and life weren't in conflict, where creation existed as both expression and sustenance. I discovered that clarity, once achieved, allows room for mistakes, for mess, for imperfection, and still feels whole. The Han River remained my silent confidant. On nights when the world felt too loud, I would walk its banks, listening to the slow, steady flow of water. Taehyung's words came back to me. "You finally stood still enough to watch the water move." I understood now that stillness was not stagnation, it was foundation. And in that foundation, I found space for love, for music, for life without compromise. Each interaction, each practice, each solitary night of reflection became part of a new rhythm. Harmony didn't require equality in all things, it required respect, space, and integration. Music and life, love and creation, public and private all could coexist if I allowed myself to move with presence rather than performance. Even in the quietest moments, when no one was watching, I felt the pulse of truth in my chest. It was steady, unapologetic, relentless. It reminded me that canceling the wedding wasn't a rejection of love, nor was it an act of fear. It was an affirmation of art, of self, of timing, of integrity. And in that affirmation, I found peace, not loud or dramatic, not revolutionary or shocking, but profound in its simplicity. Life, like a melody, didn't have to fit a structure someone else wrote. It could breathe, expand, and exist exactly as it needed. The quiet, undeniable freedom of living that truth became my rhythm, and it was enough. Life didn't slow down because I had made a decision. The world outside the studio still moved at the same relentless pace headlines, social media chatter, rumors, speculation, but inside, everything had shifted. The difference wasn't in the noise, it was in me. I had stopped performing for others, stopped bending myself into someone's expectation of who I was supposed to be. I had reclaimed my rhythm. Every morning, I returned to the studio with a newfound purpose. Not a schedule dictated by charts or deadlines, but a devotion to creating music that carried my heartbeat. The melodies I had been chasing in the middle of sleepless nights now existed for no one else. I let the chords breathe, let the harmonies take shape naturally, and allowed the silence between notes to speak as loudly as the sound itself. It was in those pauses that I found my own voice. Interactions with the members took on a new weight. Namjoon, ever observant, would quietly nod in approval when he saw me immersed in my craft, fully present. Jin's playful remarks continued to lighten the air, but I noticed the depth behind them, the recognition that life didn't need to be polished to be meaningful. Yoongi's silent check-ins, Hoseok's relentless energy tempered by patience, all reminded me that support didn't need words to exist. We were a unit, a family, and for the first time, I felt fully seen by them, not the performer, not the celebrity, but Taehyung. The person I cared about remained a constant presence, though the dynamic had changed. There was space now, breathing room, honesty without expectation. Conversations weren't scripted, moments weren't staged. We laughed, we shared, we existed side by side without forcing a narrative that didn't belong to us. It was in that space I realized love didn't need to be immediate or dramatic. It needed to coexist with life as it was, not as everyone else imagined it to be. Music became my lens for understanding the world. The melodies I wrote during this period were raw, introspective, and unfiltered. Not yet evolved from a solitary confession into a tapestry of emotion, a reflection of vulnerability, patience, and authenticity. Every note was a reminder that postponing something didn't mean denying it. It meant honoring the timing, respecting the journey, and trusting that when the moment was right, it would feel like home. Even the simplest routines became moments of revelation. Sharing meals, rehearsing late into the night, laughing over small mistakes, these were no longer background noise. They were the foundation of life, the rhythm I had been chasing without realizing it. Jin's midnight ramen became more than food. It was a metaphor for living without perfection, for accepting messiness, for finding joy in the uncurated. I thought often about the imagined wedding I had canceled. At first, it had felt like a loss, a decision weighed down by fear. But now I understood it differently. I hadn't canceled a dream. I had rewritten it. I had stopped chasing an image and started creating a reality that allowed me to exist fully. If love was to enter my life, it would do so without asking me to diminish the parts of myself that were non negotiable: the restless energy, the sleepless nights, the obsession with music, the relentless pursuit of art. Public reactions were still unpredictable. Fans debated, speculated, and tried to interpret every gesture, every lyric, every post. Headlines labeled me brave, scared, or eccentric. But I no longer measured my life against those judgments. The only metric that mattered was whether I could breathe freely, whether I could create honestly, whether I could love without compromise. I found clarity in the ordinary, in the mundane, in the quiet spaces between chaos. Walking alone by the Han River, watching the water move slowly, I recognized that life didn't have to be loud to be real. Taehyung's words echoed. You finally stood still enough to watch the water move. I understood that stillness was not stagnation, it was presence, and in presence, I found the foundation for everything else: love, art, life. Even performances on stage became different. I moved with intention, letting my body express truth rather than expectation. The audience still cheered, the light still shone, but I was no longer performing for validation. I was performing for myself and the music, and that honesty resonated deeper than any choreographed perfection ever could. Family, friends, and members became my compass, guiding me without dictating my direction. Jin's support, Namjoon's insight, Yoongi's quiet wisdom, Hoseok's encouragement, they all reminded me that life could be lived fully without sacrificing authenticity. And in that environment, I discovered that love and music could coexist without compromise. Every day, I returned to the studio with gratitude for the freedom I had reclaimed. The imagined wedding no longer haunted me. It had been transformed into understanding, patience, and self respect. I was learning to live with my own rhythm, to honor my own timing, and to trust that when the right moment came, love would enter naturally without forcing me to leave myself behind. The greatest lesson I had learned was simple but profound. The most loving thing I could do for myself and for others was to be honest, to honor my heart, my art, and my truth. Canceling the wedding was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of a life lived with integrity, clarity, and the courage to embrace the unpredictable, messy, and beautiful journey that lay ahead. And so I moved forward, composing, rehearsing, laughing, breathing, with the knowledge that my life, my art, and my heart were mine to live fully. The world could speculate, create narratives, and draw conclusions, but inside I was free. Free to create, free to love, free to exist exactly as I was, free to rewrite the future on my own terms. Life didn't pause because I had made a choice. The world outside the studio still spun with relentless speed headlines, social media speculation, and fans' endless theories, but inside I had found a quiet revolution. The difference wasn't external, it was internal. I had stopped performing for everyone else and started existing for myself. For the first time in a long time, I was moving to my own rhythm. The studio became my sanctuary. Every day I returned with purpose, not dictated by charts, schedules, or expectations, but by the simple desire to create music that reflected my heartbeat. The melodies that had once been chased out of obligation now emerged from patience, from presence, from life observed deeply. Every note, every pause, every quiet breath became a conversation with myself, honest, unfiltered, and alive. The members noticed the change. Namjoon's quiet acknowledgement felt like a steady anchor. Jin's humor, once just playful, now carried the warmth of understanding. Yoongi's silent support, Hoseok's tempered energy, Jimin's gentle guidance, all of it reminded me that I was surrounded by people who saw me, not the version the world imagined. I wasn't Taehyung the performer, I was Taehyung the person, and that presence mattered more than any applause. Even my relationship with the person I cared about evolved. There was space now, room for honesty without pretense. Conversations became real, laughter became spontaneous, and shared moments didn't need a timeline or a plan. I realized love didn't need to be dramatic, performative, or immediate. It needed to coexist with life as it was. If it was to endure, it had to fit naturally within the rhythm of our realities, not the fantasy the world had created. Music reflected this change. Not yet, transformed from a private confession into a living testament of my journey, a melody full of raw emotion, patience, and introspection. Each chord, each pause, each breath told the story of clarity and self respect. Postponing the wedding didn't mean denying love. It meant honoring its timing, respecting the space it deserved, and trusting that it would arrive without compromise.